Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Open University.
Hello dear student, have a nice day. Myself Kiran Patel, Assistant Professor in School of Computer Science of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University, Ahmedabad, Gujarat. Dear students, we are going to start with the course RDBMS, Relational Database Management System. In today's session, we will learn about the Block 4, Unit 4 is an exception handling. This is the first part of this unit. Now, we will start with the Block 4, Unit 4 is an exception handling. First of all, we see the agenda of Unit 4 is the learning objectives, introduction of exception, user-defined exception, predefined exception, SQL code and SQL error message, pragma exception, etc. After completed this unit, students will be able to understand what is exception. When use the exception to understand the different types of exception, how to write and handle the runtime error using exception in PL/SQL block. Now, start with the introduction part. What is exception? Exception is an abnormal condition or a error situation which arises during the program execution. See, here it is a runtime error. If the syntax error is generated at a compile time, but it is a runtime error or abnormal situation is called the exception. Now, PL/SQL provides the exception block which helping the programmer to find out the error or a fault and handle it. During the execution of the PL/SQL block, when an abnormal condition occurs or error situation take place, then exception is raised and normal flow of the execution of PL/SQL block is stopped and control transfer to the exception handling block. The exception handler are the block of the code written to handle the exception. So, here we use the exception section. The PL/SQL block have 4 parts: declaration section, begin section, exception section and end section. If in a execution in a begin section, if any error or abnormal condition is generated, then it will handle by the exception section. Now, what is the different types of exception? The exception can be 2 types. First is the system defined or predefined exception and second one is the user defined exception. Now, what is system defined or predefined exception? These exceptions are predefined in a PL/SQL block which is raised when certain database rules is violated or the coding rules is not proper. The predefined exception are raised implicitly. It is not raised by user. It is automatically raised. When PL/SQL raise a predefined exception, then program is terminated by displaying the error message. The system defined exception are further divided into the 2 categories. First is the named system exception and second one is the unnamed system exception using pragma exception in it. Now, second one is the user defined exception. This type of exception occurs when the user can create their own exception according to the needs and to raise this exception explicitly using the raise command. So, when the PLSQL raise a user-defined exception, then exception handling block is used to handle this exception. When exception is occur, then control transfer to the exception handling part. After the exception handler completes the exception or execution, control is transferred back to the next statement in a enclosing block. If there is no enclosing block, then control returns to the host from where we run the PLSQL block. So, the system defined or a predefined exception is a implicitly and user defined exception is a explicitly. System defined or predefined exception is generated automatically and user defined exception is generated by the user or a programmer. Now, what is the syntax of exception? See, here there are 4 parts: declare, begin, exception and end. Now, in a declaration section is used to declare the exception. Here, we also declared the exception variable. Now, the begin section. The begin section is used to define the executable commands or the statements. If in this statement any abnormal condition is occurred or any errors occurs at a runtime, then this will handle by the exception section. Here, in exception section is used to handle the exception which is raised from the begin section. Exception 1, 2 up to n in a exception section are the exceptions that are handled by the exception section and given proper message. When other keywords should be used only at the end of the exception handling block, as no exception handling part present later will get the executed, as control will exit from the block after executing when others. These exceptions are either predefined or a user defined exception. If the exception is raised based on handled by the exception section, then PLSQL block is terminated by displaying the error message related to that exception. So, here the begin section is executed the SQL statements, and if any error or abnormal condition is generated, then control transfer to the exception section, and those abnormal condition or error handled by the exception 1. If this exception is matched, then this statement is executed. If this exception is matched, then this statement is executed. If no one exception section is matched, then other part is executed. Now, what is system defined? First is the system defined or predefined or a named exception. So, what is predefined exception? Predefined exception is raised automatically whenever there is a violation of the Oracle coding rules. The PLSQL has already defined the certain common errors and gives the name to these errors, which are called as a predefined exception. Each exception has a corresponding Oracle error code. The predefined exception handler are declared globally in a package standard. We don't need to define them. The example of predefined exception are zero divide, no data found, duplicate value on index. These all are the predefined exception named. Means the Oracle have already named exception like this: zero divide, no data found. These all are already stored in a system and it will generate when abnormal condition is occurred. See, we can try to understand with the example. Example of the zero divide exception. Zero divide is raised automatically when we try to divide a number by 0. If you try to one number divisible by 0, then this exception is occur or this error is occur, which is handled by the zero divide exception. See, here in PLSQL block is there. Here declared three variables num, div and result. These are the three variables of the number data types, and num is stored 50. 50 value is assigned into the number variable and 0 is assigned in a div variable. Now, in a begin, the result variable is equal to num divided by div. Div is a 0 and number is a 50. So, it will 50 divided by 0. We already know the number is not divisible by 0. So, the rules is violated. That's why the exception or abnormal condition is generated here. So, execution control is transferred to the exception section, and here we write the part 0 divide exception. When 0 underscore divide, then this type of exception is generated, then it will display by divide by 0 and some error message SQL ERRM. It will generate the error message. So, the output is, if you execute this block, then you are getting divide by 0 ORA 01476. This one is the SQL code and this is the error message. Divisor is equal to 0. So, it will successfully executed. If you are not included this exception part, then this PLSQL block generate the error or which is not successfully executed. So, here in a division program, we included the exception section. So, it will easily normally execution of this block and handle proper data. If you are enter 50 and 10 number, then it will execute it properly. But in this situation, exception is generated. Now, next example is no data found exception. See, try to understand with the example. Here, SID, PLSQL block to find out the name and address of the salesman whose ID is 10, but there is no any records in the tables of the salesman with the ID 10. So, the PLSQL block raised the runtime exception named no data found, which is captured in a exception block. See, in this example, SID, SName and SAddress. This one is the user defined variable. Here SID salesman.id. Salesman is the table name, ID is the column name. In a salesman table, ID column percentage type means ID column have a data type and size which is assigned to the SID. So, SID data type is same as the ID column data type. SName is the same as salesman table. In salesman table, name column have data type and size which is assigned to this variable. So, same as this, and address data type have a same data type as a address column. Now SID is assigned by 10 value. Here begin. Select name, address into SName, S address from salesman, where ID is equal to SID, means SID is equal to 10. In a salesman table, ID is matched with the value 10 and fetch the name and address and stored in this variable, and it will print. If the SID 10 value is matched, then it will print. But here in a salesman table, ID have a no 10 value. So it will generate no data found. There was no any records of SID 10. So it will generate exception. If you are not included this exception section, then it will generate the error. If you included this exception section, then it will executed normally, successfully and print with no such salesman exists. Now, the next is the duplicate value on an index exception. In this, the duplicate value on index exception is raised when the SQL statement tries to insert a duplicate value in an ID columns of the salesman table on which the primary key and unique constraint are defined. See, in this example, in a salesman table, ID column is a primary key. So it will not store the duplicate value, and if you try to insert the duplicate value, like in begin, insert into salesman in ID value 1 value is already inserted in a ID column, but if you try to insert this value, then exception is generated or duplicate value error is generated. So this error is handled by the exception section when duplicate value on an index, then this message is displayed. If you are not write down this exception, then it will generate the error with the duplicate value error. So error is handled by this exception. So exception section is included, then this program is normally executed. Now handle more than one exception. How to write more than one exception in a exception section? See, in the syntax, in a exception section, when no data found or too many rows, then you can write down more than one exception like this: no data found or too many rows, or we can write down other exception name. Now see, in the example, PLSQL block to find out the name and address of the salesman whose ID is 10. Here there are two situation occurs. Either there is no any records in the table, or there are more than one records found in the salesman table with the ID 10. Thus, the PLSQL block raised the runtime exception named no data found or a too many rows, which is captured in a exception block. See, in the example, here S is the variable, is a object types of the variable, and salesman table have a percentage row type. So all the column fetch with this S variable. Here in the begin, select name, address into S.name, S.address. In the salesman table, from this column, name and address column data is stored in this variable S.name and S.address. Name value is stored in this and address value is stored in this, and after that the data will be printed. RDBMS underscore output dot put underscore line is print this S name and address whose ID is 10. But if there is two situation, there are no data found or there are too many rows also. If this error is occurred, then it will handle by this. When no data found, if there is no any records whose ID, if there is no any records whose ID is 10 or there are too many rows, then output is displayed duplicate value on the index, or we can say there is no any records. Okay, so how can handle more than one exception? Like this, when this error name or this error name, or we can write down others. Now in your SLM, table is given which is shown some important predefined exception with their meanings and error code. So please read them. Now at the end, thank you all. Today we have been discussed about the PLSQL exception, how to handle the runtime error using exception section block and predefined named exception. In next section, we will continue the remaining topics like the pragma exception in it, or a user defined exception, or a raised exception in exception handling. If you understand this session and getting the knowledge from this session, then please subscribe the BAOUGujarat. And once again, thank you all.